Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. My name is Radha Priti, and I am here with a group of seekers. We are reading through the Bhagavad Gita like we do every Monday and Thursday morning. If you want to join us and share your realizations and reflections, or just listen in live because it helps keep us accountable, please do. You can email me at seekersquest108@gmail.com and I'll send you the links. Or you can also check out our Instagram and there's links in the bio, Seekers Quest 108. So, yeah, we're in chapter 3 today and we're coming up to the end. We're about to start chapter 4. We probably will start chapter 4 in February. So we've been at this since August. So how many months is that? August, September, I don't know, 6 months maybe? Are we there already? So yeah, we're doing it. So today we're going to start with text 338. I'm going to just review text 337 because it's kind of part of the same section. So I want us all to be on the same page. So I'm just going to read 337 first and give like a brief summary, and then we'll move on to 338. So 337 says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "It is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world." So we talked about how lust comes in contact with the mode of passion, and then our desires are just like become kind of out of control. And when we don't get what we want, we get angry. And anger turns into illusion. And illusion is what keeps us here in this material world. So we talked a lot about lust and the danger of lust, and even kind of how to try to identify when we're in this cycle of lust and anger. And we talked a lot about how sometimes anger doesn't even come out as like anger, as like maybe you yelling or getting upset. We have different ways of even masking anger. So we really have to kind of identify based off our own unique makeup, when we're in that cycle, so that we can try to do something like to make a sattvic decision, right? Because we talked about when we're in lust, when we really want something, we're in this mode of passion, and so easily this mode of passion we can go down into the mode of ignorance, right? When we get angry. So when we're in that mode, before we even get to that anger spot, if we can identify that we're kind of that we have these kind of out of control desires and make a choice, some kind of choice to be more sattvic, maybe some spiritual practices, maybe spending time in nature, maybe just slowing down, right? We can try to use these modes to elevate ourselves so that we don't get stuck in this cycle of lust, anger, illusion, which binds us to the material world. So that was 337. Today we're going to talk about 338 and 339. So we'll start with 338. 338 says, as fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. So like I said, the rest of this chapter is going to be on this subject, answering this question that Arjuna asked in 336, which was, by what is one impelled to sinful actions, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? So like, why do we do things that we know we don't want to do, but we do them anyway, as if engaged by force? And so this is the answer to that question that he asked in 336. So continuing on with this theme of lust, the previous verse explained that we're all subject to this self-destructive desire and that it can be deadly, right? Like none of us can get out of it. None of us are immune to it. It's a symptom of this vehicle in this material existence. We're all going to experience it to some degree. We're all going to be captivated by some kind of material attachment, and it might be different. It will be different for all of us, but it will be there. And that's just part of our makeup. And it can be really bad, especially if that's something is really in the mode of ignorance, like substances or alcohol, something that brings us down pretty quick, right? But even things that don't, we can still overindulge. Like I talked about my exercise addiction, which is very much in the mode of rajas. rajasic, but it can bring you down. It can, what we find is any material attachment that we have, that if we overdo, it can soon bring us south. So we have to be mindful of our material attachments, how we're spending our time, where we're putting our consciousness, what we're investing in this material existence, understanding that one, it can bring us down, and two, if it doesn't bring us down, it can be, it's temporary. So again, even if we're in a really great relationship and we say, this is it for me, that's great, that's wonderful, but still understand that you may experience a great loss with that. So in that, as spiritual seekers, we want to develop this relationship with source, with divinity, with God, whatever name you have for God, because this is God, our relationship with God is eternal. And it never brings us down. It only brings us up. So we can get as engaged in spiritual practices as we desire, and it will never bring us down, like exercise, like alcohol, like aspiring for money or power, all these things that can really lead us to low places. Spiritual life never does that, and it's eternal. So again, even the things that don't turn south, if we're fortunate enough to have things in our lives that we can keep investing in, they don't turn south, like a wonderful relationship, that this can be temporary. So we have to prepare ourselves. And that's what we're here doing every morning. It's a process, gradual realization. Just like any relationship, we have to put the time in, we have to put the effort in, the consciousness in, and we'll see benefit over time. We'll see ourselves less attached to these material things that are pulling us down or temporary, and more attached to divinity. And in that, we ourselves will become more stable, right? Like we're not building our house, our castle on a foundation of sand, right? We want that foundation to be strong. And that's a relationship with source. That's everything else is ultimately going to be a relationship or a foundation of sand, which is unfortunate, but it's the truth. And if we know this now, we can prepare so that when that moment comes, we're better equipped to handle it. Right. And ultimately we're securing our destiny for our soul. So back to this verse. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. So again, we're all under attack. How is everyone under attack? This inner energy covers our knowledge. This lust covers our knowledge. There's 3 examples that are given here. Fire is covered by smoke. Mirror is covered by dust. Child is covered by the womb. So for a fire that is covered by smoke, the smoke, it's the least thick, and it can be moved pretty easily to reveal the fire. We all been around smoke and fire. You can kind of wave your hand and the smoke goes away and you can see the fire. So it's a mild obstruction, right? A person with some control over desire can still access their wisdom with effort, right? So if, we all have material attachments to some degree, but this person can, still access that knowledge, that inner wisdom, understand that relationship with source is the most important thing. And that understand the mind, the body, the soul, and the difference between them pretty easily, even though the material desires still obstruct them a little bit naturally. Dust is a little bit thicker, but it can still be removed, right? This is a moderate obstruction. Regular cleansing, like spiritual practices, chanting, meditation, it's needed to regain clarity, but it's a little bit thicker. A coat of dust on a mirror is a little bit thicker. If there's a coat of dust on a mirror and you look in the mirror, you can't quite see. It requires a good amount of kind of scrubbing. And that's our spiritual practices. Now, a child covered in a womb is the thickest, right? And it takes much longer to remove the covering. In fact, it's a whole process removing that covering. It's a complete obstruction. When we're deeply attached to material desires, it's hard to see beyond them without significant guidance and practice. So that's like where we're the most covered. And again, we're the most covered this lust. We mistake this lust. We displace our love for source and connection. We displace that in material attachments around us. And this is when it's transformed into lust. And this lust becomes a covering to what's really real. It causes us to stop pursuing what's really real because we think that we're satisfied with this kind of temporary excitement that we experience in this world. And it's through this process of life that we have that we start to learn as these things get taken away from us, or these things, don't turn out the way that we thought they would. We start to learn that, hey, this actually isn't really eternal. This isn't satisfying to my soul forever because it was here yesterday. Today it's not. I thought it was this great love. It's actually not, right? We're trying to fit all these things in our God-shaped hole. And in that, we forget who we actually are and what we're actually meant to do here. We become kind of distracted. We become covered. So these are the three metaphors. And this part gets a little bit esoteric here, so stick with me. The smoke and the fire metaphor refers to humans, right? The degree that humans are attached. The dust and mirror metaphor applies to animals, and the womb covering the child applies to plants. So the idea is the degree of covering is much greater in some species. So what does this actually mean? We don't think of trees as being like specifically lusty, right? A tree, like what kind of desires does a tree have? But it's more in terms of the degree of the covering created by the desire. So again, we have to start to learn to see our lives through the lens of the Gita instead of seeing the Gita through the lens of our lives. So if we like zoom way out here and we understand that the idea is that the soul is covered by lust, and the purpose of human life is to recover the soul, to clean it off, right? To kind of correct this illusion. But if we use this human life to dirty it up further, we'll lose the capacity to recover it. In the same way that, like, if you go to the gym all the time and lift weights and you stop going, you'll lose your muscles. You'll lose the capacity to keep lifting weights. So we have this human life is such a blessing because we have the benefit, or, as opposed to other species of life, this human life, we have the capacity to understand spiritual knowledge, spiritual realization, why we're here, where we're going, what we're doing. Other species don't have that capacity. So if we're not using that capacity, if we use it and we're distracted with all these indulgences, naturally we'll lose it. And then in the next life, we'll come back as a lower species because we weren't tapping into that capacity. So that's why it's the degree of covering that kind of dictates what it applies to, because that it's our process as we degrade ourselves by not cleaning off the covering, will be demoted into lower species of lives in our next life as our soul progresses through its eternal journey. So we see, like, the more, I'm going to use that example of an alcoholic a lot because it's one that a lot of us can relate to, and we see a lot in society. And so the more an alcoholic drinks, their craving for drinking becomes stronger. And as this happens, their inner alarms become weaker, right? So they become less even like sensitive to being drunk. And the greater their craving, the greater their covering, right? The more illusion that they're in, the greater their craving, the greater their covering. The covering of consciousness, the covering of morality, the covering of awareness of the consequences of their actions. Right? The more that their indulgence increases, the more that they're covered by this illusion. Right? So if someone indulges in lust excessively when they're in the human form, when the soul goes into the next body, where their consciousness will be highly covered, like that of a tree. So that's just an example of a person in this life degrading themselves, to which their consciousness is their in complete illusion. So again, they'll lose that capacity for that higher level thinking, and they'll be demoted to lower, to their machine that they'll get will be fitted to what they're going to do with it, right? And if they're so covered, then when the soul goes to choose a body, it's not going to need to choose a body that has a very high capacity, just naturally. So we have to pay attention to our signals whenever we're starting to overdo it. And we all have these signals: emotional signals, mental signals, physical, when we're overdoing it. right? Even our body machine, we have these biological signals, right? Like overeating, for example. We all know when we're full, right? And people that have a food addiction, their stomach expands and they have less signals, right? If we overeat enough, our signals kind of are, it's harder and harder to feel the signals, which is like what that stomach surgery is, that gastro bypass surgery, where they take out part of the stomach so that a person feels fuller quicker and they'll stop eating. Like we even have figured out a way to like correct it when we've gone way too far over the edge. We figured out a way to like correct it, to reinstill the signals so that we can come back to a place of health, like a restart, right? So this is how important signals are in our lives. Like our bodies have them. And we all know, we have our intuition. We all know, like when we're in over our head in a certain situation or a relationship isn't good for us. We have this kind of intuition. We have these signals that this isn't good for us for whatever reason. So when we're starting to overdo it, when we're starting to rely too much on material attachments to fulfill our heart, we have these signals. And this comes out, this can easily be like a toxic relationship, when you're making your partner God and you're kind of you're trying to get all your happiness from that one person, which is just not any of our natural positions, right? That nobody can be that for anybody. And chances are it's going to create a toxic dynamic. So we all have these signals. And when we neglect them, it increases. And this is why boundaries are so important, to recognize them and set them intelligently. So there is this desire there. And what do we do about it, right? In human form, it's relatively easy to handle the signals. Even though expertise is still needed, we can seek that expertise in different areas depending on what it is. The covering can be removed if we handle it judiciously enough. The dust on a mirror, if the covering gets so thick, we may be an animal body, we may be in a human body, but we have like an animalistic tendency. Like we can't stop ourselves from it. This is like when the cycle of addiction starts. It's like we can't help ourselves. So we're almost like animalistic in that we really don't have the control, right? There's no sense of decency. So we all need to remove whatever the covering is on us. We have to take steps back. We have to seek help. Oftentimes it's seeking some order of knowledge higher than ourselves most of the time, because most of the times we don't have it or we wouldn't be doing it, right? So we have to get real about that and seek that help. And depending on the degree of dust on the mirror, we'll be able to see our face clearly, right? So when this craving covers, there's dim self-awareness. Like for an alcoholic will forget his children or forget about having to take care of them. I know, as a child of an alcoholic, I remember many times sitting, waiting for my dad to come or pick me up and just waiting, because they're so under illusion and they're just chasing this what they think is going to satisfy them, that they forget even their personal responsibilities. What's even dearest to their heart, they just forget, right? It just takes complete control over them. And it just keeps going down until there's no self-awareness, no understandings of consequences to myself or others. They don't even see the mirror. There's like no sense of right or wrong. And we see this. I mean, this is an extreme example, alcoholism, but anything really can overtake you in the material world where you start to prioritize it above other things, like even like a workaholic. If you're spending time with your kids, but you're constantly on your computer or your phone because you're so addicted to that work, it starts to impede your life a little bit, your relationships, what are you seeking shelter of? And it's bad for your spiritual life, but it's bad for, something higher in your material life. Feel like your relationships with your family, which in our material culture is like the highest. And it is high. But so we see this playing out. So lust is a covering that comes with this material existence that obscures our consciousness. That's a given. Part of having a material body is having this lust, and it's going to obscure your consciousness to some degree. Maybe you're lucky and it only obscures it a little bit, but some of us have not been so much so, and it obscures it a lot. And the purification is a process of cleaning the covering away. The soul is covered and it needs to be uncovered. And when it's uncovered, it will be recovered. Right? So it's covered, it needs to be uncovered. It's covered with this fixation, this lust for material attachments. We need to clean that away. We do that through purifying processes. We do that from experience, learning that these things really don't bring us as much happiness as we thought. And in that, when we can clear that away and we can pursue spiritual connection, our soul is recovered. Our soul steps back into its original existence, its original identity, and we're more in touch with that. And this is the process of purification or healing. And that's what this human life is made for. It's an opportunity for us to escape this entanglement of material existence. And it's the only species, this human existence is the only species where we can conquer this enemy, lust, by cultivation of God consciousness under guidance. And these addiction things I'm talking about, like the 12-step program or recovery programs, or most of them have this element of connection with source, right? We have to reach out for something higher than ourselves to kind of get out of this hole that we've dug. Right? We have to fill that God-shaped hole. We have to connect. That's really what we're craving. And they've identified this, and it's like a component in these practices, right? Whatever you do, it's a big component in these practices to get out of that. So for us, overcoming the obstruction, awareness is big, right? Acknowledge the desires that cloud our judgment. Reflect on whether they bring lasting happiness or temporary pleasure. I think Denny just read on the board, Oreos and Amazon. Oh no, Netflix and Oreos. I know you said Amazon. Yeah, those two things can very easily cloud our judgment, and we can be in a Netflix hole before we know it. And we have to be aware of that. Our spiritual practices can help us get out. Engaging in practices like meditation, prayer, reading spiritual text. This helps to clean the dust off of your mind. Right? We're getting in contact with what we actually are, who we actually are, and our identity, our real identity starts to shine through a little bit more. And then we detach gradually, right? Focus on reducing attachment by redirecting our desires towards something higher than ourselves. This is how we climb out of this hole. Redirecting our desires towards something higher than ourselves, selfless service or higher goals. Right? So in decision making, if a desire for material gains clouds your ability to make ethical decisions, we can stop, we can pause, and evaluate the long-term impact of our choices, right? We can do that in this human body. In relationships, we can avoid letting personal desires like control or validation obscure our ability to understand and connect with others genuinely. And then personally, if desires for quick results distract us from consistent effort, we can remind ourselves of the importance of patience and discipline. So these are some of the ways that we can start to kind of uncover the soul, right, and reclaim our natural identity. But it's a gradual process, and it takes a lot of self-awareness, which is in this mode of sattva, right? This reflection, this mode of awareness, this mode of contentment. We have to kind of come to terms with who we are, and so that we can start refining and pruning ourselves in preparation for our eternal destination. So that was 338. Does anybody want to share anything before we move on to 339? Ah, Trevor, there you are. Oh, you're so sweet. Good morning. Okay, we'll move on to,
Good morning.
Good morning. So we'll move on to 339. 339 says, thus the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. Thus the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. So this text is a sobering description of what happens. It's saying that the soul is wise, it has knowledge, but that knowledge is covered. And when there's covering, there's lack of awareness. And lust is an eternal enemy, right? It burns like fire and is insatiable. That's the word. So we're always vulnerable. We're always under attack, right? As age, this is interesting. We see in our bodies, as age increases, our capacity to enjoy decreases, right? So like our beauty starts to leave us. We can't eat as much. We can't do as much physically, right? It's like our bodies kind of prepare us for this. But what happens is desires don't always, the desire to enjoy doesn't always decrease proportionally with that. And sometimes at the end of life, people find themselves in a pickle because they're still so attached, or they can't embrace old age in a way that would bring much more peace to their minds. They're constantly trying to look younger or be hipper, or they can't let go. But we know whether we let go or not, if we're still holding on, it's going to be forced out of our hands, right? Whether or not we can loosen that grip, it's all going to be forced out of our hands. So we have to prepare for that. That's what we're doing here. This requires conscious effort, conscious redirection, right? Intentionally driven renunciation. So if what we're taking shelter in right now is our job or our bodies or our times at the gym, or even a functional identity role like a parent, our bodies, either by time's going to take these things away from us, or our bodies are just not going to have that capacity. Like if I need to work out to feel better about myself, soon enough I'm just not going to be able to do that like I have. And so we have to find other ways to seek shelter, other things to seek shelter in, or our lives will become very difficult when that time comes. And we have to be prepared for things that maybe don't require so much energy expenditure from us. Things like meditation, things like reading scriptures, things that can nourish us, that we could do forever. Right? And if one doesn't try to regulate their desires, then even if he doesn't indulge in old age or next childhood, for his next childhood, it will start manifesting. This goes the same for any desire, power, or craving. So if we don't do this, it's gonna determine what our next body is, based off of a body that's conducive for that. And we're gonna have to keep learning these lessons. So we're all vulnerable to these self-destructive desires. And this is also a very sobering description that it's an eternal enemy, right? That lust is an eternal enemy. The desire torments us for lifetimes. Like the impressions, we talked about the impressions in the last class, like our past experiences, our past conditionings. They're stored in our minds and they go with our soul to the next body. Now, the bondage isn't eternal, right? The only thing that is eternal is spiritual love and joy. But the bondage feels eternal when we're tormented. And the torment only ends when we resolve to say no. When we get to the point where we say, this is enough of this. I can't take shelter in my body anymore because it's consistently proves me wrong, right? I can't take shelter in this relationship anymore because it's hurting my heart. Right? I can't take shelter in these drugs anymore because it's taking away everything that I have in this life. And so if we have to abstain eventually, then why not give us some thought now? Right? And if a person thinks that they've won this war, if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't have anything like this, I'm pretty balanced. This doesn't happen to me. Be careful, right? Because if the enemy is down, it doesn't mean he's out. The enemy may be inactive, but he may be regrouping for a bigger attack in the future. And if you're unaware of it now, with time and the experience of life, you'll become more and more aware of it, right? You'll become more and more aware of what you're taking shelter in and how that can bring you down. And it's like fire, right? the verse talks about how this is like fire. Like normally when we feel the heat of a fire, we can move away. But the fire of desire, when that comes, we move closer. And we think that by enjoying this fire, we'll become pacified. Right? But it's insatiable. The very indulgence is fuel for the fire. That's just the nature of material attachments. The more we indulge, it's the more fuel for the fire. And although indulgence at one level can give us relief, like very short-term relief, the relief is only temporary. And it also fuels the fire, fans the craving, so that it becomes bigger and bigger until the next time it will be felt even more. And this is unfortunately just the way that material desires work. It's so hard to say, it's so hard to be a person that says, I want the newest and greatest car, but I'm going to keep this car for 20 years. Usually a person who really wants the newest and greatest car, it's not a one-time thing. It's like they get that car and then they're looking at the next newest and greatest. And then they get that and then they're looking at the next. And before you know it, they're like a slave to the workplace because they have all these desires that they're convinced that they need, that they identify themselves with, and they can't let it go. And that in itself can be destructive, these uncurbed desires. So desire, it's not inherently bad, but it's when it becomes excessive and uncontrollable. It clouds judgment, disturbs the mind, and distracts us from meaningful goals. Right? So if it's gone beyond boundaries and it can't be satisfied by indulgence, indulgence will only make it worse and worse. That's kind of the point for desire. We talk about and we all have to kind of identify what things we're prone to going overboard with. I've talked before about how I used to drink wine, not like crazy, but I used to drink wine and I used to eat a lot of sweets, like a lot of sweets. And I would have no problem like throwing away a half a glass of wine at the end of the night. I wouldn't even think anything of it. If I was done, I was done. But I would never, ever do that to a sweet. It was like I could not walk away from that. And I would rationalize it like, oh, I don't want to waste food, because it's cost money. But here, like this wine costs like 5 times more than this, and I had no problem throwing it out. So it was like even just going through that exercise with myself was like, oh, wait, I have much more of an attachment to this than I do this. This, even though I may not be going overboard on this today, it's only a matter of time because I can see how strong my attachment is to that particular thing. And therefore, I need to have more tighter boundaries around that. For me, myself, I could have 10 bottles of wine in the house and it's not even a thing I think about. But if I have boxes of cookies in my pantry, it's a problem. I have to be, I have to decide, I have to kind of discern between those things where my attachments are and create these boundaries to protect myself. Danny says I can never throw cookies away, right? Right. So we have to figure out for ourselves where these attachments are and where we're prone for these desires to kind of explode on us and kind of cut them off. Really cut them off and know that that's for our benefit, that we're reclaiming control over our lives, right? That we're turning towards something bigger than ourselves when we're able to do that. So what may not seem like a big deal at first, it could take its toll over time. I just talked about my sugar addiction. Sugar I was just talking to Todd last night actually about this sugar addiction. Sugar activates the brain's reward system and releases dopamine, similar to substances like nicotine or drugs. Studies show that excessive sugar consumption leads to cravings, withdrawal symptoms, and overconsumptions. These are like hallmarks of sugar addiction. And it's crazy because these processed food companies, they engineer their products with this bliss point, the perfect combination of sugar, fat, and salt to make food like irresistible, right? And they add sugar to products that wouldn't normally need it so that people get like used to tasting it and want it more. They like kind of make us addicted to it. They even market it to us. I even read a thing yesterday. In the 1960s, the sugar industry funded research that downplayed sugar's role in heart disease and instead blamed fat. So then this misinformation shaped the public dietary guidelines for decades. People were increasing sugar consumption, thinking that fat was the culprit. And now it's like switched back right? It's like, it's just crazy how these companies, they don't directly admit to making products addictive, but they intentionally formulate foods to maximize cravings and encourage overconsumption. And people get hooked. And this increases their profits, their bottom line, which is like, like capitalism. But this is what happens. And this is what happens, the internet does the same thing to us. We might not think this is such a big thing. We're just like killing 5 minutes before an appointment. But then we come home, we're spending time with our family, we're at dinner, and we're just constantly browsing. We can't get off it. We're so addicted, right? When we indulge in any sense object repeatedly, it's like an invisible shackle between our consciousness and that object. And things like this, these cultural influences that we don't even think anything of, or that we just trust, we just kind of blindly trust because we feel like, oh, they're looking out for my best interest. It's not. We have to be in touch with ourselves so often, unfortunately, in this society. It's just not. And with every future indulgence, this rope that's binding us, that's shackling us, it thickens and it tightens until we become puppets. Right? We're literally just puppets of these these sugar companies. like that's what's happening. We're giving up our freedom. We're giving up our control without even really knowing it. And this is why this self-awareness, this distance, we can't just become like trust culture or what's happening around us, because it's so oftentimes the motives behind what's going on there is it's not for our best interest. It's not going to protect us. I guess the point is we can't just expect things to protect us, or we can't expect even to be able to engage in our culture without having some of this come up for us. So we really have to be kind of masters of ourselves and not get lazy or complacent. At the same time, this temptation exists in our minds, right? Not just our external environments. So we think of this mind-soul vehicle. We could think of like the body as the hardware of a computer system, right? The mind is the software and the soul is the user. And the mind is the tool through which awareness comes in, and then based off of that, action comes out. And we have all these knowledge acquiring senses. We're able to see things, we're able to hear things, and we can process information mentally. So we have these knowledge acquiring senses, information comes out, and then actions come out. And if something makes sense when we perceive something, we'll engage with it. And if it doesn't, we'll become skeptical and withdraw. So our actions are responses to what we're seeing around us. Right? And this way, the mind acts as like a transmitter. It takes in information, it transmits awareness to our spiritual side so we can process and respond, and then it transmits our intentions back to guide our actions. And the mind is a key part of this inner and outer transmission. But the mind is also a transformer. Right? So inside the mind, we talked about there's these impressions, which are like scars on our psyche, and they can impede us. These impressions can be positive or negative. Like we all see, like if positive impressions are like, we see people that are just naturally good at things, just like somebody has high emotional intelligence, or like maybe a child prodigy has like an instinct for chess or playing an instrument, or, just these things that they just, these positive impressions in their mind that just come natural to them. And then we have these negative impressions, right? Anger, lust, greed, jealousy. These are examples of impulses that override our intelligent decision-making. So if two people see a bottle of alcohol, both people's minds will take it as a transmitter, but if one person has alcohol in their mind already, if this impression exists, it'll act as a transformer, and they'll see it everywhere, and their perception becomes amplified and spreads inside their mind, taking over this inner screen. So depending on your impressions that are already existing in your mind can act like a transformer. And even though you maybe just walked past a bar, if you have a lot of impressions in your mind from enjoying alcohol, then you show up to work and it's all you can think about, it's all you can see, and your mind amplifies it. Right? So this sensory information, it doesn't just stay in the external world. It tends to become bigger and bigger over time, and it consumes our inner peace. So in that way, our minds can be both a transmitter and a transformer. Transmitter in that it takes in the information and it and the given action comes out. But a transformer is that it takes in a small input and it lets it dominate this internal world. And the external perception may come from the world around us, but how it affects us internally depends on our conditioning, right? The perception may be minimized or magnified. This is how the mind operates. So what we see, like, again, two people can see the very same thing and it invades their mind differently. And everybody has a unique makeup and is coming into this world with unique conditioning and unique impressions already in their mind that is going to be impacted differently. And then as they accrue experience in this life, they'll acquire more impressions that are then going to affect how this mind, body, soul machine operates. So again, just the best we can do is just know our mind, body, know where we see these triggers, these signals when our body is telling us to stop, when we see these red lights flashing, or when we see that we're particularly attached to one thing and maybe not so much to other things, right? And in that way, we can be honest with ourselves and create some healthy boundaries about it. Because our mind goes wherever its foremost impressions or conditions pull it. If the impressions pull it towards impure indulgences, we'll feel tempted no matter where we are physically. So this verse tells us that these destructive desires are our eternal enemies, right? It hounds us in all places. And these destructive desires, they don't reside outside in sense objects. They reside inside in our own sense, mind, and intelligence. So external places matter because the inner desires can be triggered by outer perceptions. Right? This is why it's not good for like an alcoholic to go to a bar. But if we only focus on avoiding external places, it's going to be difficult because it's rampant in today's materialistic culture. It's everywhere. All these temptations. I mean, again, these marketing companies are like making a killing off of just trying to push whatever's going to feel good in the moment. What'll just make somebody click buy, or yep, I'll do that because that's going to mask some of this whatever I'm feeling that I don't want to feel right now, right? Or we may trick ourselves into believing that temptation only exists outside us and have a false sense of security. We may think like, okay, I got it all figured out. I don't really need these boundaries. I'm in a good place. And we should know that as soon as we think that, we're vulnerable. So like we always say, we need to transform these desires into higher aspirations. We're all going to have desires. It's part of this material makeup. We can't get out of it. We can't repress them. We're all going to have desires. But instead of suppressing them, channel them into positive and selfless activities that are going to bring you up, that are going to upgrade your consciousness. Right? Redirect your longing for material success into a desire to serve others or grow spiritually. Spiritual practices, mindfulness, contentment also helps reduce excessive cravings and cultivate inner satisfaction. So wherever you are, whatever you're feeling pulled towards, just try to make a decision that's one step higher, right? This one step that's just a little bit better than where you are. So if you're turning to, I know at AA meetings, I've been to a few of them. Actually, I've been to a decent amount of them. They always have coffee, right? It's like, and it's funny at first because I actually, you see people get addicted to coffee, but I think the idea is like addicted to coffee is better than addicted to drugs, right? And it's true. Like wherever you are, just it's incremental progress. Like just try to make a little bit better decision. And we learn these modes, tamastic, rajastic, sattvic, to kind of help us identify the direction that we're going and why. So we can do that. We could do that now, today. And we can see these desires as a teacher, right? We use moments of craving as an opportunity for self-reflection, right? Like, why do I do this? Will it truly fulfill me? Is it aligned with my higher purpose? Right? So with material possessions, before buying something you don't need, reflect on whether it adds real value to our life or if it's just a fleeting craving, right? Overindulgence in pleasures, eating, binge watching, or other overindulgences that just make us feel unsatisfied. Right? Pause and consider moderations to avoid burning ourselves out. And then in relationships, this excessive desire for attention or validation that can lead to disappointment, right? We should focus on our own self-worth and building authentic connections instead. So those are just some tips to get us going in the right direction want to read a question here on Scarlett asks, please forgive, in the temple they always sweet with sugar. Do I understand it right that sugar is a sweet change, the bad negative quality, and is okay to distribute this? So I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question correctly, but when we do go to temples, a lot of times they distribute really sugary things. And this is like spiritualized food that was offered to the Lord. And so we eat it, and we're spiritualized and it's nourishing. But that doesn't exude our personal responsibility to also, like, we just because it's spiritual food, it doesn't mean we can eat 100 of them and rationalize it that way. We still want to have some kind of cognizance over how it's affecting our body and take responsibility for that. So I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question correctly, but this is actually, I've had this conversation with, actually, this is what Todd and I were talking about last night, because the sugar, it is a thing, especially in our culture. It's like everywhere. And it can be good, just like a lot of things can be good, but there's this place that it can be not so good, where we start to lose a little bit of control, where we start to see that I don't feel so good after I ate that many of these. And we can't ignore these signals in the name of prashadam, spiritualized food. So, okay, now I'm gonna get to like the pinnacle of class, which is, I always save like the best for last. I've been doing that the past couple of times, and it's kind of fun. But does anybody want to share anything else before I go into this last point? Okay, we're going to talk about the difference between love and lust. Right, so love is the heart's deepest aspiration, right? We all want to love and to be loved. Yeah, in the name of love, people will act stupidly, shamelessly, self-destructively. They ruin their own lives, or they break the hearts of others, right? Believing that they're so in love. They may rush into incompatible relationships that soon turns toxic, right? They might have extra affairs that wreck their own happy families, right? And they call this love. Right? This is so common, actually. We're so desperate to love and to be loved that we'll so easily mistake it, right? Because we want it so bad. Right? And this is love. It's distorted by lust, right? Lust is the self-centered obsession that makes us treat others and looks and features as sources of irresistible pleasures, right? That's lust. Like if we can't control ourselves, or we feel like we can't control ourselves, that's lust, right? So know when you're in lust, and it's a natural stage, even of like when you're falling in love in a healthy way, there'll definitely be some lust there at the beginning, but know what it is and what it isn't, right? And when that blindfold falls on our consciousness, we can't see anything else other to gratify that lust, right? We crave it. We become a slave to it. We're blind to its cost. Just like this verse says, lust covers our knowledge. Love is not just the emotion that we feel in the presence of someone. It's that dedication of our actions for everyone's holistic well-being. Right? That's the highest. That's love. It inspires us to become our best so that we can offer our best to our beloved. That's love. And ultimately, it should bring us closer to God, not make us further away. Right? We should be imbibing more godlike qualities, not becoming degraded. Right? That's again a perverted sense of love that we call lust here. Ultimately, the greatest love is for source, right? That's like the most unconditional love that we can have, is this relationship with God. So love in this world, we can also learn to spiritualize, right? So seeing others not as objects for our material gratification, but as partners in our spiritual evolution. Right? We're not looking to choose a partner so that I can get this, and this from you, or so that I can be satisfied in this, and this way. Right? We're choosing them as partners for our spiritual evolution. Someone that we can work, that we can center our lives around God with, right? That's going to maybe check us when we need to be checked. That maybe has qualities, godlike qualities that we want to imbibe, right? That we admire. I know I feel that way about my husband. He has so many godlike qualities that I want to aspire to. And he also checks me, when I'm getting a little bit out of control, which happens here and there. So this is a partner. This is somebody that's helping you stay in the lines to get where you want to go. It's not just merely somebody there to fulfill the needs of the ego, so that you aren't alone or that you feel, validated, or that's we don't need that, right? We should get to the point where we don't need that. We should get to this place of a higher love where we can spiritualize our love. If we can infuse this vision into our relationships, these physical infatuations is gradually superseded by spiritual bonding. So it's not even that, like, physical things that are important to some degree, that's just natural. But if we can spiritualize our relationships, those things will soon be superseded by spiritual bonding, right? And that's the goal. Because again, if you're growing old together, you're going to get to that place anyway. Those things are going to go away, and they certainly can't be the center of a relationship. You can't be feeling like if you aren't looking a certain way, or if, you get pregnant and gain a bunch of weight, that your husband's going to leave you. I never felt like that, but I'm just saying that would be terrible. Um, so this is a God-centered relationship. This leads to transformational, loving exchanges that help bring out each other's fullest spiritual potential. This is like the highest order that we can have in this life, right? I mean, really, mother-child relationship is like unconditional love. But when we're talking about choosing a partner, or, that's like the best we could do. Find somebody that we can move closer to God's with. We can go through this journey together. Trevor, do you want to share something?
Yeah, I was just gonna talk about the vices of the material world and little tactics that are useful to break free from them. Whenever you notice yourself being called to something that you know is not really desirable for your soul, that you just know it's not good for you, but there's this pull towards it. Um, just remember that if you give into that, that spoiled brat inside of you just goes to sleep. It doesn't go away. It doesn't make it better. It makes it stronger. So whenever that brat wakes back up, he's gonna be throwing an even stronger temper tantrum. So the more you feed those desires, the stronger they get. Like the fire that keeps raging because you keep stacking wood on it. But if that's why in this culture they just forbid things for the most part, just don't do it, and of course it's difficult, but that's why the methods of meditation are so useful and recommended, because when you notice these urges appear, uh that's when you say, oh, it's time to chant. It's not I know that's not the right choice for me, so let's chant for a little bit till I feel a little better, vibrate a little bit higher past whatever's pulling me down to a lower situation. And eventually, after beating it so many times, it gets easier and easier, and you don't even think about it. An example of a lower nature material desire and a higher spiritual desire would be like wanting a house. You know, everyone wants a nice place to live and a luxurious comfort, so to say. Um, Nice facility to be in. Uh, but eventually, um, you grow a higher desire, higher vibrational desire would be like wanting to utilize your space to become conscious. I want a facility not just to be comfortable in. I want a facility that I could use to raise my family up in consciousness in, and even more so, whenever you start developing an even stronger spiritual desire, I want a space to help others become conscious in. So then you start wanting like a temple or a land that's suitable to inspire people on. So that's examples of like how a material desire over time can move into a spiritual desire.
Mhm.
They might
Yeah.
sound material saying, "Oh, I want this house," but if your use for it is in service to God, then your material desire just graduated into a spiritual desire from that point.
Yeah, you just summarized the whole lecture today, the whole class today. So that's it. That's that's the essence of what we're talking about here today. And thank you, Trevor.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful summary.
It was a
And,
beautiful class.
and Scarlett asked if one due to childhood experience has no idea what love is. Yeah, that happens to a lot of us. That's pretty normal, I think. And we learn. I mean, best if we can get this knowledge from a young age. The younger age, the easier. If you're a mother and you have just to teach your children these things, there's no better service because it will save them from a lot of this heartbreak. But if, a lot of times our parents don't even have access to this knowledge. And in that case, we all have to learn, we'll see our parents having difficult relationships when they're, our parents, because they don't know. And that happens, we get in these relationships where we're either making that person God or we're becoming God. And we learn how unnatural that is and how many complications that creates. And we learn what happens and we learn how painful that is. And then we think, wow, what's going on? If we're lucky or smart, we'll seek outside help. Maybe we'll go to a therapist and to see what's going on with this dynamic. Where am I going wrong? Where am I? We learn that we're looking to this person to solve some kind of hole that we have, some or to validate something in ourselves that we haven't quite been able to come to terms with, or all these dysfunctional dynamics that exist. Then we have to learn how to be by ourselves, how to be happy by ourselves, how to be a little bit more independent and content. And then hopefully we can learn what a healthy relationship looks like. It's like a process. And that's kind of the reality of it. And even if we learn these things when we're young, we still may have to learn it on our own in this way. So it doesn't also guarantee, but yeah, it happens. I think that's normal. So I think what happens if we don't learn it, it's just a little bit more pain. And maybe that pain, if we can use that pain, to ultimately become closer to source, then maybe it's not all lost. Maybe that's okay too. I know that was part of my big journey. My big story is some pretty terrible relationships that brought me to my knees just to question, there's got to be something bigger, better than this, because this is a dead end. I feel so trapped and lost and afraid. So maybe that's part of our story and part of our karma, but it's all unique. It's all unique to our circumstances. And we just have to do the best we can with what we got. Right. So the principle here in this verse is we can never win a war if we're not even aware that we're in a war. And if we're not even aware we're in a war, we don't even have a shot. And it's not just a war, but it's a deadly war. Right? This lust can really pull us in directions. We can end up, 80 years old and still seeking power. And, who wants to be 80 years old and still care that much about these things, right? It's like we want to imagine that as we're getting older, we're kind of letting go and becoming more content. And right, it's so recognize these things now, and we can be that much further along when we get to that place. And Krishna is drawing out that we're in a war, and that's the focus of this section. And we're going to talk more about what to do about that in the future verses. But that's all that I had for today. Does anybody else want to share anything before we leave for the day? I have like all the A stars here, and I talked the whole time. I didn't get to hear from any of you.
I'll share something quickly before we get off here. Just a
Yeah.
few reflections. Hold on, I'm gonna say bye to Luna. Bye, Luna. Have a good day. Love you.
Aw. Bye, Luna.
See you tonight, she said.
Aw. Wonderful.
So, um, you're talking about like being 80 and, we should be becoming more like, wise and calm and content. And it's just so interesting. Like, I think about like my grandmother, and she was in her 70s and 80s when she moved in next to us. And I remember one of the things she was always like, "Oh, this person's so young and beautiful." And I remember, I wish I was 16 again. And she was so attached to that, And I remember, like, at a young age thinking, like,
Oh, you just went out. Such a nice reflection. You just went out. Uh, you went out. You went out when you said, "I remember at a young age thinking."
oh, yeah, like how bad, like how sad it was that my grandmother was like so attached to like wanting to be young still. And I remember just thinking, like, I hope that I'm not attached like that. And when I was young, there was like so much, like, I remember when I was young, I wanted to be older. Like, I always wanted to fit in with my older siblings and be older. And I was like, couldn't wait till I was like an adult. And now I'm like, now I kind of wish I was a kid again, but not like the same way that she did. And I remember just thinking, like, man, I don't want to be this age anymore. Like, I want to be older. Like, how come she's so attached to wanting to be younger? Um, so that was just like a
Yeah.
funny reflection that came to my mind. And then the last thing that I want to share is just like growing up also, like my mom would always talk about, I grew up with an alcoholic father also. And my
Know
mother would
that.
all, yeah.
Didn't know that.
And my mom would always talk about like, having a sober mind. And she would be like, even people who aren't alcoholics don't necessarily have a sober thoughts. And I think we see that more and more in today's day and age, how unsober our mind is, even when we're not partaking in seemingly drugs or alcohol, and just how unsobering like social media and TV and all these things are. And
Yeah.
that's something I contemplate a lot, is just like how to maintain a sober mind. Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
all I have for today.
Those are great points. I have a friend who, like, a big turning point in their spiritual life was seeing their father pass on their deathbed, and they said they could see the fear in his eyes.
Wow.
And I think about that a lot now. It's that's so common, but to be at that place and be fearful and to be so attached, one, it's like sad. But two, it's like that's going to determine the destination of your soul. And wouldn't it be so much better to be in her deathbed and be like feeling connected to source, like, okay, I'm ready for what's next. Take me there,
Yeah.
right? Rather than like so attached to what we're leaving behind and fearful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like to think that I'll be there because I have so much information about Krishna and the next life, but we never know at that time of death.
No, we never know, but every week, what we could do now is make this commitment every day to wake up, immerse ourselves in spiritual knowledge, to meditate, to chant, to associate with like-minded people. That's all we can do. And if we do that every day, we'll be someplace better than we would be if we didn't. But yeah, we don't know even where we'll be.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
sharing. Anybody else before we leave? So nice. Thank you all. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you all on Monday.